Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Asia Impact Webinar, Asia's SMEs Beyond the COVID-19 Crisis. I'm Yasu Sawada, Chief Economist of Asian Development Bank, ADB. I will moderate today's webinar. Measures to contain COVID-19 outbreaks have had a substantial impact on Asia's micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, in short, MSMEs. MSMEs have cut back production and service delivery during the pandemic. They have been forced to temporarily lay off employees and face a lack of a working capital, making it very difficult to continue operating. Prolonged containment of COVID-19 has been fueling the accumulated risk of business failures and bankruptcies further through abrupt supply chain disruptions and tightened financial conditions. What do these firms urgently need to survive the pandemic and thrive in its aftermath? Today, we will discuss these critical and burning issues together with top experts on MSMEs. Distinguished panelists discuss how governments coordinate ongoing MSE policies and what policy approaches and actions would be required after COVID-19 or under the forthcoming new normal. Now, I'd like to introduce today's panelists, Mr. Tetsushi Sonobe, Dean of Asian Development Bank Institute. Welcome, Mr. Sonobe. Ms. Tentative Spuhanji, Chief of Financing for Development in Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, United Nations SCAP, the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, SCAP, UN SCAP. Welcome, Ms. Spuhanji. Mr. Neil Adrian Cabiles, Director of the International Financial Group, IFG, Department of Finance of the Government of the Philippines. Welcome, Mr. Cabiles. Finally, not least, I'd like to introduce today's webinar host, Mr. Shigehiro Shinozaki, Senior Economist of ADB's Research Department, Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, in short ERCD, Asian Development Bank. He is the lead author of Asia Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Monitor 2020. We believe this report would become a benchmark in the region's recovery towards a new normal. So now let's invite Mr. Shinozaki for initial presentation titled COVID-19 Impacts on MSEs and Post-Crisis Action. So Shige, you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Over to you, Shige.
Thank you, Yasu. So just a moment. Okay. So now, can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
So thank you, Yasu. And good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about this COVID-19 impact on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, or MSMEs. We conducted the rapid surveys in 4 countries, Indonesia, Laos PDR, the Philippines, and Thailand, to assess the impact on MSMEs relatively soon after the pandemic was declared by WHO in March. The first survey was conducted from March to April, and the follow-up surveys were conducted from August to September. For the Philippines, a business survey was also conducted separately from April to May, covering all enterprises. So today, I'd like to present key findings from these surveys, tracking 6 months after the outbreak, so especially focusing on the Philippines. Okay. So before moving to the survey result, let me summarize the Asian countries' responses to COVID-19 in brief. As you see this table, many countries acted quickly to curb the economic contraction caused by the COVID-19 pandemic through large-scale economic stimulus packages. By type of policy instrument, debt finance was most widely utilized to support MSMEs, so followed by tax relief, the employment support, and support for retaining the business. For debt finance, Central banks initiated several liquidity support measures for banks to facilitate lending to MSMEs, as well as loan repayment deferrals and loan restructuring for MSMEs. For tax relief, corporate tax reductions or exemptions helped MSMEs affected by the pandemic and quarantine measures. This figure shows a country comparison on MSMEs business environments in the initial 2 months after the COVID-19 outbreak. As you see this figure, we saw immediate shutdowns of business in the majority of MSMEs in the Philippines and low PDR, and less than half in Indonesia and Thailand. Domestic demand was dropped in 40% of MSMEs in Thailand and low PDR, and 30% in the Philippines in Indonesia. The supply disruptions was identified in more than 30% of MSMEs in Thailand and the Philippines, and less than 20% in Indonesia and low PDR. Six months after the outbreak, business environment around MSMEs has moderately improved. So this figure shows the case of the Philippines by firm size. In March and April, about 70% of MSMEs suspended their operations relatively soon after the strict lockdown measures imposed. But in August and September, the number of MSMEs that temporarily closed business sharply decreased. So businesses started reopening, so suggesting the Philippine economy has moved to the recovery stage. However, a drop in domestic demand on MSME products and services has expanded further, so especially in small and medium-sized enterprises. For monthly income, the majority of MSMEs in the Philippines faced immediate no revenue caused by the strict lockdown measures in March. This condition has largely improved in August. So MSMEs with no revenue decreased sharply. However, about 40% of MSMEs faced over 30% revenue drop with expanding trend. For employment by MSMEs, as indicated in the left-hand side, MSMEs that reduced employees decreased in August for microenterprises, but in the same condition for small firms and rather increased for medium-sized firms. Most microenterprises reported no change of employment in August, suggesting their employment is returning to normal. So more concretely, MSMEs with temporarily staffing cut decreased in August, so especially a sharp decrease in micro enterprises. More interestingly, work from home was not a serious option for MSMEs in March, but those arranged work from home has gradually increased. For the total wage payments to employees, the large number of MSMEs suspended wage payments relatively soon after the outbreak in March. But those with no wage payments decreased sharply in August. However, MSMEs cutting over 30% of wage gradually increased, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises. This figure shows financial condition of MSMEs during the pandemic in the Philippines. In March and April, MSMEs faced a serious lack of funds to retain business, especially in micro enterprises. This condition has moderately improved in August. MSMEs with already no cash and savings decreased sharply in August, especially micro enterprises. Those who reported funds to be run out within 3 months at the time of the survey also decreased in August. However, MSMEs with funds to be run out in 6 months increased in August, especially medium-sized enterprises. Okay. So for funding condition, MSMEs face much difficulty in raising sufficient working capital to survive during the pandemic. Most MSMEs still highly rely on their own funds and borrowing from families, relatives, and friends to survive. But towards September, their dependence on informal financing sources has decreased. Instead, access to bank credit has gradually increased for MSMEs. Our survey also asked what actions MSMEs consider if the pandemic continued for more than a month after the survey was taken. Their top concerns were loan repayments and tax payments. So although the demand has slightly declined, MSMEs moderately wanted deferrals of tax payments and loan repayments. So among existing and possible policy measures, we identified most MSMEs strongly desired financial support from the government. So from the beginnings of the pandemic, the majority of MSMEs wanted zero interest rate or collateral-free loans, which was followed by faster approval of bank loans in August and September. So besides credit access, subsidies for business recovery, cash transfer, and grants were the top policy measures MSMEs desired in the beginning of the pandemic, followed by the comprehensive information platform on government assistance programs and tax relief. The top two measures desired by MSMEs remained in August and September, business subsidies and tax relief. So this is a summary of key findings from our surveys. Overall, Asian economies have gradually shifted to recovery stage. But a devastated business environment has yet to be recovered, so with continued sharp drop in demand and revenue. The employment condition was mixed by firm size, but MSMEs are preparing new business environment under the new normal, adapting work from home arrangements. However, the working capital shortage in 3 to 6 months has risen. So this elevated the demand from MSMEs on further financial assistance from the government, especially addressing loan repayments and tax payments. So given the uncertain environment of containing the COVID-19 and the different coping abilities of the impact by firm size, government needs to elaborate phased approach and differentiated policy measures by firm size and sector. Now it's time for the government to consider optimal approach, neither impeding national revenues nor increasing the budgetary burden in the post-COVID-19. Okay, so this is for your information. We plan to launch the second volume of Asia SME Monitor 2020 today, but we faced another delay of publication process. So please be patient a bit for the launch of the volume 2. Okay, I will stop here. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shige, for very succinct but very, very useful presentation based on granular and field level micro information. And this is basically based on variable surveys, first-hand surveys. And your presentation is very useful to set the stage for the panel discussion. So now I'd like to move on to a panel discussion by the distinguished experts. According to Shige's presentation, it was clear loan repayments and tax payments remain the top two concerns of MSMEs. Although Shige's presentation today really focused on the Philippines, but other analysis of Shige's dataset seems to show the similar pattern in other countries. So first issue is access to finance. What policy actions would be required to support the MSMEs after COVID-19 crisis? And also given the financial assistance, the most desired policy measures by MSMEs, what strategic actions should be government or financial authority implement by short, mid-term, and long-term containment scenario? So this is the one big question about access to finance. And the second question is around the tax relief measures. What tax relief measures has the government in your country implemented to support MSMEs? For example, gradual reduction of corporate tax income, expedited tax refunds, tax incentive for investors, payroll, social security, VAT, and tax reduction or exemption. What are the major constraints and challenges to implement tax relief programs for MSMEs? And also, given a long-term containment scenario, what would be the best approach on taxation, neither impeding national revenues or increasing budgetary burdens in the post-COVID-19? So these are the basic questions we'd like to have your views, distinguished panelists. So now let's invite distinguished experts for a panel discussion. Panelists, please address these questions on access to finance or tax relief or related issues. Please feel free to spend your initial intervention, but please confine your first intervention to 4 minutes or 5 minutes each. So now let me invite Tetsushi, Dean ADB Institute, for the initial intervention. So Tetsushi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Yasu. And thank you very much, Shige, for very clear, granular presentation. Very useful. And then to the question, yeah, I think this question itself indicates what is needed, what is important for the government to consider. So short, mid, and long-term containment scenario. So the kind of contingency plan or the kind of long-term plan should be shown by the government so that private sector can prepare or can make a plan for the recovery. Rather than the government just respond haphazard way, and then the series of just taking a series of haphazard policies. It's very important to show the kind of contingency plan. And having said, yes, so of course any policy would make any sense if the MSMEs or economy die. So the first thing to do would be to keep those enterprises working on, so that debt relief and tax relief will be very important. But then how to finance is a big problem. Of course, the situation varies from country to country, wildly. But overall, the many developing countries cannot behave like a Japanese government, where the debt ratio, debt to GDP ratio can be the more than 200% or 250%. So developing countries cannot do that. So they have to get mobilize the domestic resources. whenever or wherever the resources are available. That means they should work very hard to collect tax from the, those sectors or those businesses which were less suffering or not hit hard as many small the medium or micro enterprises. But of course, the business people who responded to Shige's survey of MSMEs, they are busy people, so they said only the essential things like tax relief or debt relief. But of course, there are other policies which would be useful in the long run after COVID-19. So the government should provide necessary public goods. And then public goods, number one would be infrastructure, hard and soft infrastructure. Hard one, it would be to solve the problem of the digital divide. So digitalization or digital transformation will become vital for the future of the MSMEs too. So, but digital divide is a big problem. So make more and more MSMEs, able to have good access to internet, or so that they can move more and more toward e-commerce. But then the regulation framework for developing e-commerce will become important. That's another type of infrastructure, soft infrastructure. And then, of course, necessary public goods is not only infrastructure, but also the rules, good rules, right? So not only the e-commerce regulation, but also other aspects of the digital transformation requires some regulatory framework or rules for competition, like privacy protection, consumer protection, and those things. And then the knowledge is also important infrastructure, okay? Important public goods. For example, the MSMEs after COVID-19, we have to reconsider their quality control, productivity improvement, so extension service for the era of digital transformation will become important. But of course, let me go back to the essential things. So even if the government provide nice public goods, if those MSMEs fail to survive, then they don't work at all. So to keep their survival, so debt relief and tax relief will be very important. And then also the multilateral development bank, like ADB, which liken itself to the family doctor, should ask the government or should encourage governments of developing countries in the region to have a nice contingency plan, not just a series of haphazard policies. Okay, I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tetsushi, for a very, very insightful intervention. I think among the very important few points you raised, especially role of infrastructure and how to tap digitization and setting a better regulatory framework for better business ecosystem so that burden of finance and tax payment reduced. I think that's a very, very important message. And also, of course, the role of ADB and other MDBs. So now I'd like to turn to second panelist. But before that, for audience, please feel free to put your questions or comments in the Q&A box so that second round, we can have a more interactive discussion. So let me invite Tentative, Ms. Tentative Spuhanji, again, Chief of Financing for Development, the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, United Nations SCAP. So Tentative, can I invite you for your views on MSME issues and challenges? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sawada. And good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. I also would like to say thank you to ADB for inviting me to this very important forum. I believe it's a very timely forum because, you know, at the moment we have been almost a year into this COVID pandemic, and it's very clear right now that it is more prolonged than we thought. So it's really important that we start thinking about how we're going to live as an individual and how businesses are going to do their business. And thank you for posing a very interesting questions. I'd like to say that here, you know, and at the UNSCAP, since the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, so we've been working very hard to come up with many things to help countries go through this COVID-19 pandemic. Although we're not a bank, so we cannot lend, but we certainly try to provide some advisory service and capacity building activities for them. At the UN, at the moment, we are launching this global project on SME in response to COVID-19 with the collaboration between many regional commissions, not only in Asia Pacific, but also in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. We're going to produce some knowledge product on this and some online training materials. So with that, I just would like to share with you a little bit our thought on this response in terms of the policy response to COVID-19 through one of our upcoming publication, just to set a stage for further discussion in the second round. So with that, I'd like to share with you some of my presentation. I hope you can see them. Okay. Our thinking on this basically because this is based on the project to help, you know, SME and government officials deal with the crisis. So this is kind of a knowledge product, which is part of our work going forward. And I think ADB will also contribute to this. I think most of the objective really of this publication is to develop capacity building tools for MSME. So both developed here in this publication and also an online training platform for them. We try to examine issues surrounding access to finance and to facilitate SME contribution to SDG implementations. I think our thinking in terms of SME response and government response to COVID-19 can be perhaps summarized in this graph. As you know, right, before the 2020 happened and several years before, actually my past career is at the central bank. So I've seen a lot of complaint from SME throughout my 15 years career there before I moved out of central bank. So despite all the efforts that the government put in to help SME, somehow we still see a domination of big firms in most countries in the world, and SME still, problems are recurrent. Sometimes it gets better, sometimes it doesn't get better very much. So we kind of put it in that frame that even though before the 2020 took hold with this COVID-19, there's still a lot of invalid policy, things that don't work. So we try to think about whether these will still not working. Should we think about new policy that are more valid, and what are those good policies that needs to be accelerated, for example. So we kind of divided our frame of thinking into pre-COVID-19 and after COVID-19 in terms of development of what happened to the economy in general during the lockdown period, economic recession, recovery, and building back better. So the aim really is, in the end, although as Shige, I think already presented a very interesting presentations that government has been focusing on basically, immediate response. We also will evaluate also in countries in Asia Pacific on this response. This is basically what I mentioned before, during, and after. So I'm not going through that. So I think this is kind of a snapshot of what I find it this graph kind of interesting. This is our initial preliminary findings. As you can see, right, since the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it kind of endorsed the message of the rich, will always survive. Because the COVID-19 response as percent of GDP, if you see in the advanced economy, G20, for example, we're always, a lot more than low-income developing countries and emerging market economies. So as Mr. Sanobu mentioned earlier, not many countries can afford to issue government bonds at the amount, over 100% or maybe almost 200 now of GDP. Not everyone can afford that, but this crisis just, I think it kind of provides an interesting, just endorse interesting fact that you can help yourself if you're richer. So these are kind of a snapshot of what we find in terms of government efforts in helping the SME out of the crisis, both in terms of the general revenue spending, both in the health and non-health sector, and also in terms of more direct support in terms of liquidity support. One thing that I find interesting is that at the moment, for developed countries, for example, like in G20s or advanced economies, tends to provide more kind of direct support, liquidity support, more targeted in comparison to a less targeted effort in terms of general spending increase in health and non-health revenue as represented by the red bar. So that could be part of the reasons that they're poor, right? But the reason is also perhaps these low-income developing countries don't have enough diversified or developed financial sector to allow them to provide a variety of support in terms of liquidity support or targeted support to the SME and people in general in the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's, I just want to highlight there. In terms of the COVID response to MSME, I think this one, Shige already kind of elaborate very well. I just want to point out again that, in terms of the Asia Pacific region, debt finance, tax, and employment support trend is exactly the same as the global. However, what we find interesting among these, response of MSME by the government is that if you look at the low-income country part, it seems that in terms of the response, low-income countries in general, because perhaps because of the lack of resources, they also, as a proportion of all the measures, appears to be using more of a demand measures to support MSME. These could be in the form of cash hands out to low-income group or tourism industry. We feel that going forward that there needs to be a categorization of the support measures to help MSME, whether those can be categorized in terms of the income support, reducing costs, financing, capacity building, or business environment. As you see from the presentation, that most of the time up until at least second quarter of this year, most of the measures are still debt financing, tax support, which is understandable, employment support, wage subsidy, which is understandable because we are still in a period of trying to survive. But going forward, I think it's important to using more of these tools and measures to build back better in terms of structural change, either through financing means, capacity buildings, and bringing more business, enabling better business environment, as Mr. Shinobe has mentioned. I think I just want to echo what the Dean of ADBI just mentioned, right? This is a picture from the guarantee scheme in Japan. I think developed country also, of course, can afford to do so. There seems to be a lot of increase in credit guarantee in Japan. I'm not from Japan, but I believe it could be unprecedented. And it seems to be working well in developed countries. So perhaps after this COVID-19, things are getting in place, perhaps a way or finding a way to design a good market-friendly credit guarantee mechanism might be a good way also to go. This is just to inform you of our upcoming publication. In summary, and also in response to Mr. Sawada questions, I believe that, as you know, right, because of the lockdown, we try to trade off between this health concern. We said, is it life or is it economy? So suddenly we all end up being locked down, right? I was I was told to get out of office and stay home immediately. I thought it was going to be a month, and it turned out to be from March until today. One day the department store has to shut down. They thought it's going to be a month, and then suddenly it's for a long time. So we feel that perhaps the government could avoid drastic restriction measures that impact MSME operations, like the lockdown or movement of goods and people, some sectoral restrictions. Why do you pick one sector over another? Is there other better way to address the COVID-19 instead of just a lockdown? We think that there need to be a holistic and long-term support to MSME. We need to balance between, okay, the short-term measures, the relief and the stimulus, and what do we do if the pandemic prolongs? What are the things that we need to do to build back better, especially in terms of the building back better, the business environment, capacity building, which the presentation has shown that very few government has done so in terms of a long-term measures, of course, which is understandable. And perhaps focusing on the new trends like ESG or digitalization and some gender aspects of SME would probably be quite useful. So that's all from me for now. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tentative, for very, very insightful comments and discussion. Actually, ADB, since mid-April, we started tracking policy measures, ADB COVID-19 policy database. Twice a month, we update each country how much they put out as a policy package. And the latest figure shows the developing member country of ADB in total, provided announcements or put out announcement total of 3.68 trillion US dollars, or almost 15%, 15% of GDP. Enormous package already announced, and about half, or 2 trillion US dollars, put in direct income support of the families and revenue support for the MSMEs. Although enormous supports provided by governments together with the MDBs and other international organizations, still low-income economies, as you pointed, still situation is still challenging for low-income countries. And as clear from Shige's presentation, many MSMEs are struggling in spite of this huge amount of a package already announced and started implementing. So I think I totally agree to soften the big unexpected, enormous negative shock. New approaches in short term and medium term, long term are needed. So I think this is very, very good comments and intervention. So now let's invite Mr. Neil Adrian Cabiles, Director of International Finance Group of Department of Finance of the Philippines. So Neil, please spend 4 or 5 minutes for your initial view, and then we will go into the second round, responding to a few questions from the floor. Neil, over to you.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening. So depending on which time zone you might be. So thank you very much to the organizers for inviting us to be part of this webinar, and thank you for everyone who is attending. So just to contribute to the discussion, I would just like to share a couple of the policy responses adopted by the Philippines in terms of helping our MSMEs amid the COVID-19 crisis. And this discussion can move on towards what might be some other measures that we still need to adopt to be able to help our MSMEs, especially that we do see that the COVID-19 crisis is quite prolonged. So as a well, one of the landmark efforts that has been done by the Philippine government was to come up with a package of a COVID-19 response under the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, which Bayanihan actually means a sort of a community coming together to help each other in the Filipino language. So this is Republic Act 11469, and the package of measures to help our MSMEs do contain some of those that have been prescribed and have been discussed earlier. There has been some component of tax relief, particularly in terms of liberalizing the incentives for the manufacture and importation of critical or needed equipment or supplies. There was the movement of deadlines in terms of the payment of taxes, fees, and other charges that are required by law. Some credit support was also extended under this package. So there was the lowering of lending rates or interest rates. Financial institutions were encouraged to lend more to MSMEs by decreasing the reserve requirements. And there was also the grace period of a minimum of 30 days for payments on loans, including business loans, without the imposition of interests, penalties, and fees and other charges. Some form of support in terms of cash management for MSMEs was also done in the form of the grace period for the rental of business spaces that some MSMEs might be using. Another measure that was adopted was the Small Business Wage Subsidy Program. And the Small Business Wage Subsidy Program was intended to help our MSMEs in terms of paying their workers amid the disruption in their operations and their low sales. So the subsidy program was actually a monthly cash assistance that was good for 2 months to qualified employees of MSMEs. There were also other credit-related measures that were adopted. So besides the decrease in the reserve requirement ratios, the risk weight on MSME loans was also temporarily reduced, again to encourage our financial institutions to lend. And our guarantee agency, the Philippine Guarantee Company, had a credit guarantee program which guaranteed about 50% of they offered 50% credit guarantee for MSMEs that were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And these were guarantees on working capital loans, and the working capital loans given out reached to about as much as 2.4 billion US dollars. Now, well, to be frank about it, it is a difficult recovery, but we do have to strive to recover given this pandemic, given this crisis. And that is why we have also come up with a recovery package, this time the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, or the Republic Act 11494. And under this Republic Act, you could still see that at the center of it is again supporting our MSMEs. So about 1.9 billion US dollars is devoted in this law to fund support for low interest loans and credit guarantees for MSMEs, particularly those in the most affected sectors such as tourism, agriculture, fishery, and transport sectors. And we also have another round of the grace period for rent, utilities bills, and business loan payments. So besides these, we also have some pipeline. Measures that we see that would help our MSMEs. So first, there is the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, or the CREATE Act. This would see a reduction of the corporate income tax rates by 1 percentage point for every year from 2023 to 2027. This is envisioned to free up resources of MSMEs to be able to help them fund their operations, revitalize their businesses, and retain and create more jobs. The total estimated amount that might be freed up for a successful implementation of the CREATE Act would be about $9.4 billion in the next 5 years when it is implemented. Another pipeline measure that we have, which will encourage financial institutions to further lend to our MSMEs, would be the Financial Institutions Strategic Transfer Act. So the FIST Act seeks to allow financial institutions to offload their non-performing assets and non-performing loans to special purpose vehicles. And this could possibly free up as much as $23.56 billion worth of non-performing assets. And it's estimated that it could help as much as 600,000 MSMEs and generate as much as 3.5 million jobs. Now, the challenge that the Philippines has as of this time is that the fiscal resources are actually quite limited. Much fiscal resources have been already devoted for COVID-19 response. And we also have some need for further fiscal resources in terms of the response for the for calamities or disasters as we come into the typhoon season. So that is why much of our effort in terms of supporting MSMEs right now is actually in terms of providing them more access to credit. And that is why we also find that it is important for us to continue with our reforms into providing better access to credit for MSMEs in terms of pushing forward with our new law on movable collaterals, and also pushing forward in terms of our law for warehouse receipts. Also, there are also a couple of efforts that we have to exert in supporting our MSMEs that may not be necessarily be credit or fiscal in nature. There is a need for us to formalize our MSMEs to allow support to be more accessible, to allow support to be more targeted. One of the challenges that we found in the Small Business Wage Subsidy Program is that a number of our MSMEs are not really in the formal sector, and so it's quite difficult to track them. And formalizing MSMEs and extending our national ID system so that there could be an easier way of tracking our MSMEs that need assistance would actually help so much in terms of supporting this industry in this prolonged COVID-19 crisis. There's also a very great need to build the capacity of the MSMEs to adapt to the new normal. We need to capacitate the MSMEs in terms of adapting the health and safety measures so that their businesses won't be disrupted further. There might be a need for standards on regular health checks as well as safety practices. We also need to capacitate our MSMEs in terms of tapping the digital economy. There was a survey made in the Philippines around 670,000 MSMEs, and it was found that only a little under 10% actually tapped the digital economy over this pandemic. So though we see that the MSMEs were able to thrive through tapping the digital economy, there might be, we do understand the sort of maybe concern that perhaps that it's not really a very large part of our MSME industry. So we need to capacitate our MSMEs to be able to be more participative in the digital economy. We need to train maybe some of our MSMEs in terms of tapping online selling, live streaming of their businesses, and also in terms of product placement or reach, so that they could have as much buyers or customers as much as possible. There is. In terms of the digital economy, we also recognize that to be able to effectively support our MSMEs, we need to actually improve our digital infrastructure. We need to improve connectivity further. We need, I think this was mentioned earlier, that we need to also improve our regulations, especially in terms of consumer protection. Much of the online transactions happening in the Philippines right now still actually observe cash on delivery instead of digital payments. And this is because people still perceive a certain risk when they do digital payments. So if we improve the consumer protection in the digital economy, perhaps this will be able to address that issue, and it could harness even further what the digital economy can do to help the MSMEs and also the economy in general. So I'll stop there so that we could go to the second round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's very remarkable to see different measures from almost all possible angle by the government already initiated directly or indirectly support MSMEs. Shige will lead our tracking, monitor MSMEs, so that we can provide the useful evidence for pursuing and fine-tuning policy programs for the Philippines and other countries. Thank you very much. Question goes, many MSMEs shut down operation due to COVID-19. How has this impacted women workers? And what intervention should be done in terms of training, finance, market information, and digitization? So Tentative, can you spend, because of the time, can you spend only 1 minute or 2 minutes at most on responding to the impact on women and what kind of policy you can envision?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, at UNSCAP, we also have a project to help women entrepreneurs gain more access to credit. And one thing that usually most SMEs, right, in many developing countries are women, right, and sometimes are single entrepreneurship. So I feel that actually, right, by helping MSME gain access to finance is actually helping a lot of women who are in, in SME sectors. A lot of them are in informal sector. I think going forward, right, because of this COVID-19 disruption, there's going to be, some of the SME that will try, because they can leverage on this digital platform, digital knowledge to sell their goods and products, while others may lag behind. So I feel that in terms of providing capacity for MSME and also the entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, is to build and try to close the digital gap between, SME, because some SME will die, some SME will thrive. So how do we build this, digital finance, digital education to these entrepreneurs to adapt themselves to use more of these online services? I think we can also explore, some of the alternative financing mechanism, not just the normal bank loans or government support continuing. We could explore some of the online platform, alternative capital raising mechanism. It could be, should the government provide enabling business environment to promote more of some kind of an online platform, crowdfunding for some of the SME entrepreneurs, those people who do not have opportunity before, and the opportunities are even more limited given this COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it's also both way, in a sense that the government provide enabling environment, but also the private sectors, the businesses should also come out and inform the government of what should be the standard, the procedures that they need in order to for us to provide the support. And with that, right, the international organization, yes, like the UN also stand ready to provide support for women entrepreneurs. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Tentative. Actually, your comment echoes the point made by Dean Sonobe on the role of digitization and better regulatory framework. Thank you very much. So now, second question, I'd like to ask Tetsushi. Why do you think the reasons only employment in micro, not in a small and medium enterprises decline between March and August, and why we see this heterogeneity, and what's the differences in adjustment measures adopted, etc., etc. So, Dean Sonobe, Tetsushi, can you respond in again one minute, if possible?
So, business size is not distributed in the same way in the different industries or sectors. So, MSM micro enterprises may be more concentrated in the particular sector, and then that sector might have huge impact of the COVID-19. For example, in the case of Tokyo, for example, the small restaurant, tiny restaurants, hit hard, and then from the survey data, it may look like only the micro enterprises suffering a lot and bigger enterprises, but actually not. So like huge enterprises like airlines, suffering a lot too. So maybe whenever the government can have identify which type of business are more vulnerable, then the government should take the kind of differential intervention or treatment. So that's why this Shige's kind of survey research is very important to guide the policy. Yes, so that's my not proven, but that's a likely response. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A differentiated and customized approach and designing a policy measures are very important, and to do that, the evidence and data collection is really indispensable. Thank you very much. So finally, two questions I'd like to combine together, and I'd like to ask Neo and then Shige. One question is, what's the criteria for financial assistance and the targeting right people, right industry or right enterprises, given a budget constraint? What's the criteria of targeting looking forward, and also aiming at what kind of a new business models for business survival as well as worker protection? So what kind of policy measures further we can design and pursue? So this is two questions combined together. So Neo and then Shige, if you can spend 1 minute, it will be very useful. And also other question I cannot ask panelists because of time constraint is tax policy. Fiscal consolidation may be necessary after a few years. Maybe it's a little bit too early, but still, again, customized approach and differentiated approach are very useful. Thinking about fiscal sustainability. So I think that's a very important question also asked by audience, but because of time, I need to skip it. But anyway, Neo and Shige about the targeting of right enterprise with the right measure, and also what kind of business model we can envision. So Neo, can you spend 1 minute?
Yeah, so just quickly, in terms of, well, for our part, in terms of, well, as was mentioned earlier, what much of the effort right now is actually in providing better credit access to our MSMEs. And what we have done is we particularly paid attention into those hardest hit sectors, or those MSMEs in the hardest hit sectors. And so we have identified that we are looking into supporting as much of our MSMEs in the tourism, agriculture, fisheries, and the transport sector. So that's what we are looking at, and our government financial institutions as well as our other partner institutions are providing this credit. Is actually ready to actually interface with our MSMEs and to be able to exactly determine what would be their particular needs in terms of coming back or recovering from the adverse impacts of the pandemic. In terms of the new business models, I think it would be useful to have a retooling of our MSMEs. Our MSMEs need to be more adaptive to very volatile markets these days. And it has been seen that much of the MSMEs who have reported that they have more or less managed to ride out the worst part of the pandemic, and those who have actually even managed to experience a little bit of a better sales were those who managed to adopt their businesses into what was needed at the time, or what is needed at the time, such as, for example, protective equipment. And new business models must also include, as I have said earlier, certain health standards to be able to protect both the employees and the clients or the customers of these MSMEs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Now over to you, Shige, for the 1 minute intervention.
Yes, just quickly, for targeting, the assistance to focus group is critically important to encourage effective use of the limited budget and also support for these most devastated MSME groups, and including the devastated areas. And then I think the criteria, that's a very difficult question, but it's depending on the needs and also what kind of situation MSMEs have faced. So to identify that situation, continuous monitoring of business environment is critically important. And also, I would like to stress the importance of support for the women-led MSMEs and also globalized, internationalized MSMEs. So because according to our survey result, they have so much devastated by the COVID-19 and the quarantine measures as compared to the domestically focused MSMEs and also men-led MSMEs. And also their preference of government support is different from the typical MSMEs. For instance, these women-led MSMEs, they are seeking more mental support from the government and also literacy programs to strengthen their business like that. So then the government need to take care of this exact and actual demand from target focus group to design these feasible policies. That actually is a very important thing. And for the new business model, so I'd like to stress one thing. So already everyone mentioned. So under this new normal that promote a more contactless society, so governments definitely will need to promote the MSME to shift to digital transactions further. So as a business generally requires personal contact. So there's a conventional MSME is not familiar with the digital transactions. So during the pandemic, most MSMEs didn't use digital financial platforms to obtain working capital. So the digital transformation is inevitable for businesses operating under the new normal. So I could say, one very quickly, assistance should include digital skill training for MSME owners and also MSME employees. That's one of the very important thing. And last but not least, just quickly one thing, the dissemination of government support programs, especially financial support, should be strengthened further to ensure it reaches target beneficiaries. For instance, the government offered several financial assistance programs, such as the special funds, and soft loans, and credit guarantees. But most MSMEs still relied on informal sources for funds during the pandemic. So according to our surveys, a relatively high proportion of MSMEs surveyed desired comprehensive information platforms on government assistance program. I think this is a very important policy implication. Government needs to disseminate their program more actively. So that is one of the very important things. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shige. We had a very lively and constructive discussion today. We sincerely hope today's webinar will provide valuable insights for policymakers so that we can jointly promote evidence-based policy on MSME response, recovery, and further development. I'm looking forward to continuing our engagement in MSMEs. So now I'd like to close this webinar today. But before that, next webinar, I'd like to announce next webinar will be November 11 from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. in Manila time. Title is Wellness in Warring Times. This is based on Asian Development Outlook theme chapter on wellness in warring times. So this is the end of today's webinar. Please join me to thank panelists for excellent discussion. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice rest of the day and the week ahead. Thank you very much.